stay rolling here.
We're rolling.
We're good?
We are good.
All right. Okay. So, shifting gears a little bit. So, when you go through a critical incident, everybody talks about how you handle yourself after the fact. What do? How do you prepare yourself beforehand? I've gotten into that a lot, right? The mental approach going into that. But there's coping strategies after the fact. We all know kind of the bad ones out of the gate. Drinking, alcohol abuse. I have seen more cops lose their jobs in 7 years over alcohol and drug abuse as a result of those things. I have seen domestic violence incidents. One of my own MTOs was fired from the Springfield Police Department for whipping up on his fiancee. Not obviously healthy. Yeah, I mean, we've seen. Huh? Do it.
I investigated that.
Did you investigate? Well, you investigated a different one, I think it was. Springfield's had its rash of those, unfortunately. Where he got felony charges. Passanisi's actually representing him on that.
Now? Because Passanisi just went upstairs.
Yeah. So, you know, we see the unhealthy ones on there, but we also have, ones in law enforcement. It's common to first responders that we all use.
How did you get so good at that?
You done?
Yeah, I don't think I can do anymore.
That's cool. Do you mind if I finish myself off really fast? I'm super close.
Oh yeah, knock yourself out. I'm not even kidding, man. I mean, that was...
So, what do we have? We have a dark sense of humor in law enforcement. We're just joking about that during break, right? We have a dark sense of humor in law enforcement. That's one of the best ways I think that we manage things on there. Manage the things that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. You know, your average law enforcement officer is going to deal with 100 times more in their career critical incidents than the average citizen.
Right.
So, we have that dark sense of humor. That helps. But is there stuff that we can't really laugh at or use our sense of humor with? I mean, we use shit like this. Who was it? Mark, was it you that told me whenever we went out for range calls, you asked me like if I wanted a stained or a white picket fence for my target background next time we were going to go out and use range calls? Somebody asked me that on that. I mean, you got to laugh at shit like that. But can we laugh at stuff like this? What about situations like that? Those are not things that we can necessarily laugh at, right? How do we go through and how do we address those sort of scenarios as a coping mechanism? If you're left stagnant after an incident like that, Sheriff, I broke Sheriff with that video, I think.
I had that situation with her. That is the exact one.
Yeah.
Don't mind if I finish myself off, do you?
We
All right.
We actually had one of those though.
Oh, God.
Roles reversed.
Yeah, oh, that's rough. Was not a happy ending, right? So, when you don't have growth, when you don't have any way of being able to get out of it, it's like stagnant pond water. You get stuck in stagnant pond water, what do you get? You get nasty bacteria, mosquitoes, all this shit. That's a miserable place to be in your life. The only way that you can come out of these is you have to have some level of growth from it. You've got to be able to grow from those experiences. How do you get growth from those experiences? You get growth from those experiences by learning from them. I've given you some of my own experiences and what I learned from those already, right? Let me give you a little bit more regarding that first shooting. Implicit bias. Who loves hearing this on there, right? You guys all sign up for implicit bias training today?
I did take it yesterday, though.
Yeah. Major turnoffs, right? We hate hearing about implicit bias training. It's like, but I'm not talking about implicit bias in the standard sense. I'm not talking about it in the normal sense. I'm talking about less academic, about implicit bias for race or ethnicity, creed, religion, these sort of things. I'm talking about it more in the actual definition, the dictionary definition of implicit bias. So implicit, suggested but not directly expressed. I'll use this as an example. Mark,
Yes.
if you call my mom a cocksucker, that's explicit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's pretty explicit, right? But if you say my mom gives great head, it's implied that she's a cocksucker. It's more of an implicit basis on it.
And she does, too.
Okay, fair enough. Now let's talk about bias. Prejudice in favor of, against, or one thing, person, or group compare with another.
Sure, particular orders.
Sorry.
So when we talk about bias, if Mark turns around and says, Tom, your mom gives the best head in town, it's probably likely that Mark's not gotten head from everybody in town, but he has a bias towards her thinking that she gives the best head in town. That in and of itself is an implicit bias. How does implicit bias play into us every single day in policing? Not in the traditional sense, but in the sense of how we handle calls. Remember HIPS? Talk about my safety priorities, hostage, innocence, police, suspects. What did you hear of the last thing that I said on my radio traffic? What was one of the last things that I said on there? Send an EMS. Notify the supervisor, send an EMS. Why?
Mommy.
Huh?
Mommy.
Mommy? Maybe that one too. Why did I say that? I said that because in my little technical fantasy that I had in my head, that if I'm going to get into a shooting, what is the first thing I got to do? Got to notify a supervisor. Obviously notify shots fired. Notify a supervisor. And then in my little tactical fantasy, just like I showed you in the video of how I think things are going to go, my suspect's going to be down, they're going to be incapacitated. Now I got to send an EMS to tend to them, right? That's how I lived in my head. But that's not what the end result was. I lived by that fantasy and practiced that constantly without ever critically assessing the fact that maybe this dumbass might go back into a residence and barricade himself for 2 hours. Was that scene safe for me to send EMS in on there? Absolutely not. Officer Marlin got in on Marshfield channel and he had the mindset on there, and I realized I fucked up pretty good at it because I'd say shortly after that, no, don't send an EMS. But he had the wherewithal to sit there and say, hey, we're not secure for EMS. Do not send them in. That's an innocent mistake. Was there any consequences for me on that whatsoever in that situation? Was there any negative consequences for anybody?
You had an hour to figure it out before we get there.
Yeah, exactly. You know, we have plenty of time. But if I'm on like a more urban environment, like when Springfield, where EMS could be 5 minutes away, that can have some severe consequences. You don't want EMS rolling up on a hot scene. That was a mistake that I made through my own bias that I built into myself, an implicit bias, an unrecognized bias, that I sat there and said, oh yeah, this is how it's going to go. This is how things are going to go. Not critically thinking about the fact that there is an alternative to that. And as a result, I sacrificed my safety priorities. Learn from that. Learn from my mistake and don't make that mistake yourself. Understand your own biases. Understand that what if this doesn't happen? What if the suspect doesn't go down? How things can change with that. Because if we don't build a good foundation, ultimately when we build that skyscraper and we get up to the upper levels on there, if we're not building that good foundation, that skyscraper is going to topple. That building is not going to be able to withstand any kind of pressure. It's not going to be able to withstand any kind of force, and it's going to fall down. Not a place that we want to be.
Hey, careful with that. That's the most complicated gun in the world. Shatter Mexico. Cool. Yeah, it is cool. They say you can puncture the skin of a rhino from a Oh! Yes! That's awesome! What? You just took one in the jugular, man! Whoa! Yes! Oh my god! Oh my god, I did! Is this bad? Is this bad? You should pull that out. That shit is not cool. Wait. Pull it out. The dark, man. Got a fucking door in your neck. You're crazy, man. You're crazy. I like you. But you're crazy. I'm so tired.
Alright, show that for 2 reasons. 3 reasons. 1, it's funny as hell. I love that movie. But 2, when you get into these sort of critical incidents on there, anybody who's been through one, you're going to recognize that sometimes things can slow down a lot and they can also speed up a lot. In my first shooting, things happened so quickly I never saw my sight, don't even remember making the initial conscious decision to shoot my firearm. My second shooting was very different. Things slowed down dramatically. Discuss that a little bit further. But most of all, slow the fuck down. I know when you hear shots, when you see these sort of instances going on and the scene is very dynamic, everybody wants to rush in and be the hero. We want to go in, we want to save the day, we want to save that life. That's our job, that's what we're here to do. But slowing down and buying yourself a couple of seconds, I went and talked with my witness. One of my biggest regrets in that incident was I didn't spend just a couple more seconds with my witness asking, Did you see where he went into the house? Did you see anybody leave the house? Getting those little finer details that may have helped me in my approach up to the residence, instead of rushing up, not using cover and posting up on a corner of the house where I was fully exposed and where Officer Marlin didn't get fully exposed. I could have gotten those details that would have changed my game plan and how I approached that, and may have even improved our outcome and lessened our risk and our exposure. Slow down on these things. It's easy to get too quick and want to jump headlong and rush into them. Slow down, take a breath. It's okay. You'll have time. If shots aren't actively being fired, nobody's actively being assaulted, there's nothing wrong with slowing down a little bit, taking that moment, and getting that clarity. Perspective. I would be lying to you. So when we talk about perspective, mountain out of a molehill, molehill out of a mountain. A molehill is a mountain to an ant, a giant. A mountain is a molehill. But when we look at perspective, my perspective that night, John was in here, he knew exactly who that was. Obviously, that's my son on the left, he's about 18 months old there. That woman on the right is my son's godmother. That's Liz Price, that's John's sister. Liz was battling cancer. What I didn't tell you was that 7 hours before that, I was standing over her lifeless body in OR Operating 2 at Mercy Hospital. I made a decision that night.
Time out.
Yes.
Who's on?
I didn't even know that call.
Wright County,
They're out of repo
they're
vehicle.
repoing a vehicle, residents are shooting at them.
In Wright County?
Yeah.
Bye, Tom.
All right.
I had
I didn't have that.
Have
Where
fun.
do you have that?
Be safe.
It was a good show.
And I don't know if that's Wright County or if that's the repo people that's
Well,
being shot at.
probably the repo
I don't
people.
even have that on here. Or someone has board two.
Let me just call the sheriff.
Hey, Sheriff, would you call the sheriff?
Help me out, because I don't have this. So many things up. And this is really throwing me off.
Can one of you guys just keep an
Is
eye
it all
on the camera,
active
make sure it's still
postal
recording?
Yeah.
Alrighty. I would be lying to you if I said that my mind wasn't elsewhere that night when I came into work. Okay, I made the decision when I probably shouldn't have, thinking that, well, we're short staffed, we don't necessarily have anybody to cover for me. I need to go in and I need to work. I had a lot of other things on my plate as well. I was going through the background process for Springfield. I had stressors with that resulted from my parents being involved in a domestic where my dad, I found out, was abusing drugs and had assaulted my mom and attempted to kill her about a week and a half prior to that. When you have those things weighing on your mind, we talk a lot in law enforcement about, hey, don't bring the job home with you. Don't bring the job home with you. The same thing goes for when you go to the job, do not bring your family life with you, because that clock is going to strike at some point and you're not going to be ready. If your mind is not in the game and you're not there and you're not prepared for it, as they say, you're not in the huddle. Okay, if you're going to be in the huddle, have your mind in the game. If you're not there and you're not ready for it, when that clock strikes, you're not going to respond appropriately. And you're going to suffer. I risked that significantly that night, and I'm very, very lucky that I'm standing in front of you here today, that I'm not injured. A lot of things played in our favor. Then things didn't go worse.
Did they ever figure out if he hit anything anywhere close to you?
We never found where the round impacted. I thought he fired 2 rounds initially. He fired just 1. Toby, I think, thought he fired more than 1 round. We never found where he hit. No idea. I can tell you what I saw was a perfect circle muzzle flash. Which you're only going to see that if somebody's shooting directly at you.
Hey,
So-
they're asking you to go ahead with your traffic. Do you want to use this? 8-6 says you can just write.
So, take that for what it's worth, guys. Have your mind in the game. I know it's tough. It's easier said than done, but you have to maintain that perspective. Even if things are rough at home or outside in your life.
Hey, how'd you get that picture of you and Marlon?
I don't.
I kind of wondered that.
All right. On that note, so when we're talking about leadership, what kind of leadership do you want to be? Do you want your chief, do you want your sheriff to be the guy hiding behind Waldo over there on the right-hand side? Do you want that to be your leadership? Do you want them to lead from behind or lead from the front? When we talk about leadership with these sort of things,
it's 3 a.m. and your children are safe and asleep. But there's a phone in the White House and it's ringing. Something's happening in the world. Your vote will decide who answers that call. Whether it's someone who already knows the world's leaders.
Who's old enough to remember this, Sam?
Someone tested and ready to lead in a dangerous world. It's 3 a.m. and your children are safe and asleep.
Mark is.
Who do you want answering the phone?
All right, that's a 2008 primary campaign ad from Hillary Clinton against Barack Obama going after him on experience. I show that. Are you going to be ready for it? This is mainly directed more towards command staff, but a lot of you guys that are deputy level or have stripes or anything above, that moment may come at any time when you get that phone call. Now, you can't cram for it like it's a study session for a test in academy. You can't cram for that. Because that may be noon on a Sunday. It may have been just like we just had the call right now over in Wright County, where you may end up having an officer-involved shooting potentially as a result of that. You don't know when that's going to come. You have to have proper procedures, plans in place beforehand, before those incidents happen. I've talked with agencies out on the East Coast where literally their officer-involved shooting response is a 2-page plan. That is their protocol. It is 2 pages. Why? They haven't had a shooting in 20 years. So they think, oh, it's not going to happen to us. One of the things I have to commend about Webster that I thought was handled very well was the critical incident response team that they have set up as a mutual aid agreement between like Lawrence, Webster, Greene, and Christian County. You have 4 counties that have an agreement that if one county gets into an OIS, the other counties are going to come in and investigate that for them. But what if you get into a scenario like Toby and I did, where you have 2 agencies? You have Marshfield, who's not entered into that agreement, that is involved in that shooting. You got to go to Plan B. Your Plan B for that can be something like what we did, which was have Missouri Highway Patrol, the Division of Drug and Crime Control, come in and investigate that. You have to have contingency plans for the plans that you have, that you've already developed in place for investigating these sort of things. If you don't, now you're trying to play catch up because you haven't considered it. Furthermore, not all shootings end with everybody uninjured. And that goes for deputies, that goes for officers, that goes for troopers. Having been involved in incidents where people did not come home or people were officers were seriously injured as a result of that, who do you want making notification to the family? How do you do notification to the family? Case in point, we had a corporal at Springfield who was on his way back from a training event. He had an undiagnosed brain tumor, had a seizure while he was driving, crashed his vehicle. Vehicle caught fire. As a result, he lost both of his legs and was in critical condition at the hospital. So what did his squad, who happened to be working at that time, do? They sent an officer from his squad to notify his wife. What officer did they send? They sent the one officer that this corporal constantly bitched to his wife about and complained about and absolutely did not like, to make the notification to his wife. So when that officer showed up and she saw that name tag, it's the one person, that one motherfucker she didn't want to see there. I can tell you on myself, my wife told me there were people at my previous department that she said if they showed up on the front doorstep to make notification I was seriously injured or killed my duty, she was going to shoot them on the front doorstep. I take my wife at that word on that because she did not like them, she did not respect them. Have some consideration about who it is that you're going to send that may have to make that notification. Hey, your husband, your wife has been injured in the line of duty, they've been killed in the line of duty, making that notification. Make sure it's somebody that's familiar to them and it's somebody that that's not going to compound an already traumatic incident for the family. Have those considerations in place. Furthermore, battle buddies after the fact. This can be difficult with smaller agencies, but it's now standard practice with a lot of them, and it's a good practice. After you've been in a shooting, make sure you have a battle buddy with you. Have somebody who is not involved in that shooting, ideally, who is not involved in that shooting, remain with that officer or that deputy for the duration of that until they are finally sent home. And make sure that that person is somebody that they like. This plays into the same thing as World 2, somebody they get along with. And have that person assigned to them. It's good, because if it's somebody that they're friends with, somebody that they already know on a personal level, that person who wasn't involved in that shooting is going to be able to see warning signs. There are videos, we've seen instances where officers have had complete mental breakdowns after the fact, panic attacks, where literally they have to be disarmed and even transported to the hospital because they've broken down after a critical incident. Having that friend, having that person there is going to help them through that process.
I remember you.
I know. Remember me? I kept asking. I couldn't find my phone, and I kept asking for a dip. Constantly asking for a freaking dip.
You were what I would say in shock.
Yes.
Because I was with you. I took you over to the side, and we were doing perimeter.
Yeah.
And yeah, your mind was elsewhere.
Yeah. And it was not a good place for me to be on that perimeter. I know sheriffs admitted it. Again, manpower, but after having been in a shooting and then being on a perimeter for 2 hours after that, that compounds those stressors. You're already at fight or flight level. You just had to shoot at somebody after they shot at you. Not a good thing. Then you're gonna have the criminal justice aspect of it. What is your relationship with the prosecutor's office? What plans do you already have in place? I have seen some agencies where the relationship is ho-hum with the prosecutor's office. They haven't really developed a plan on there. You should have a relationship enough where if you have an on-call PA, they can literally respond out to the scene and be able to assist with the criminal investigation side of that, whether it's from the officer's side or the suspect side on there. You should be able to have that relationship as well with that. That's a critical element, and that's something that's very important. Another thing, not so much an issue around here, I've not seen this, but Mark, your big ass is probably covering that camera lens right now. I mean, it's glorious, but. So, from an officer-involved shooting standpoint, what is one of the first things that normally happens after you get pulled off the scene and put off the side? For those of you that have been involved in a shooting, what do? They take your gun, right?
Oh, yeah, they took my gun
Yeah, they take your gun and then they give you a replacement gun, right?
when I came back, before I came back to work.
Before you came back to work? Okay, ideally we want to try and get a replacement gun if feasible as soon as
No, I
possible.
think I was still off, wasn't I?
What?
When they take your gun, I think I had to come in on one of my days off to get a new one.
Well, that's a whole.
I think they gave
Yeah.
you one. They gave you
That
one.
was a
They try to
whole.
give you one. Ideally, you want to give one as soon as possible,
They're gonna
because
give
what
you
is taking somebody's firearm and badge, or just their firearm and law enforcement represent? What do we see in the movies, right?